Welcome to the latest edition of the Giants Hangout podcast presented by Crestron, a proud partner of the New York Giants. This being the final version of the regular season. We had to wait a few days because a lot has happened since the final game against the Philadelphia Eagles. We had Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll's press conference and a lot of movement on the coaching front. And that's why we're going to focus on three themes, as we always do, but not so much on the X's and O's. Instead, what some of the moves over the last few days means for the Giants this offseason. Coaching changes, what that means for the outlook of the team, as well as the quarterback outlook. Lance Medow, Russ Salzberg, Howard Cross, and Matt Citak of Giants.com joins us as well as we put a bow on the 2023 campaign. And gentlemen, let's start, of course, with the coaching changes. And Howard, when we heard Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen speak to the media on Monday, there was the term used, expectation, that Mike Kafka as well as Wink Martindale would return. Now, the key operating phrase is expectation, because at that point, Brian Daboll did not have a conversation with Wink Martindale. And clearly, we have since learned that Wink Martindale and the team have gone their separate ways, with a number of media outlets reporting that it was a resignation. So a lot clearly transpired from the presser to the news that followed over the last few days. And change is inevitable, Howard, as you can attest to as a former player in the NFL. But as far as what this means for the defense, I think they were hoping and excited about building continuity based on what the defense put forth this past season and some of the individual movement on the roster front in terms of guys putting together career years. And now, unfortunately, the Giants are going to have to start fresh with a new coordinator and a new scheme.
Yeah, you get a new coordinator, you get a new scheme. I mean, it happens a lot with teams, depending on if you have a really great success, that somebody come by and cherry picks that guy from your team, he goes off to be a head coach somewhere else, or some guys just move on, whether they resign or get fired, they just move on. So it's not an uncommon thing. Guys are, used to it, believe it or not. They learn schemes, they pick things up. 2 years ago, they were running something else. They picked up Wink's scheme in the year before. They had a really good defense. Last year, they played really well. So it's not uncommon for teams to change coordinators. It just depends on, like, when the guy that comes in, whoever that guy may be, if he's a good teacher and able to get the guys together and have them on the same page.
And Russ, as far as what this means from a dramatic standpoint, based on the media reports, we heard that there perhaps was a lot of back and forth. Maybe the relationship between Brian Daboll and Wink Martindale wasn't positive, but the bottom line is now Brian Daboll can move forward and he can once again put his own stamp on the defensive side of the ball, as a new face and a new voice will come in.
Listen, I was a big fan of Wink. Okay. I liked him. I thought he did a good job. As Howard said, change is inevitable. It happens all the time. We're seeing change in the world of football these past 2 days between Bill Belichick and Nick Saban. Change is inevitable. Bigger guys than Wink Martindale have changed jobs. The Giants will be fine. The defense will be fine. The players will be fine. Players play, coaches coach.
And you could throw Pete Carroll into the mix as well, moving on from the sidelines, at least with the Seattle Seahawks. It has been an eventful week. And Matt, it's unfortunate because, relationships are so critical when it comes to players and coaches and coaches and coaches. And clearly there seemed to be, at least according to reports, evidence of some friction on the relationship front. And that's more of a reason why it may be a positive to bring in a new voice and a new face. But the Giants defense, at least, had some principles to build off of. They were extremely opportunistic this past season. They were tied with the Baltimore Ravens in turnover differential and takeaways for number one in the NFL. So whoever the new defensive coordinator is has some big shoes to fill in terms of piggybacking off of that, as well as trying to build off of how many players we saw from an individual standpoint make some big strides this season.
Oh, definitely. And, as Russ alluded to, Wink, he's a good defensive coach, but if you look at the Giants defense the last 2 years, it's not like the defense was the best unit in the NFL. I mean, last year, the 2022 season, the Giants run D was clearly the Achilles heel of the defense. They went into the offseason clearly trying to address that position, added A'Shaun Robinson, Rakeem Nunez-Roches, Bobby Okereke, and they came back this year and the run defense struggled again. I mean, part of it was definitely, Leonard Williams being traded halfway through the season, but that was a consistent weakness of the defense that just did not get better over the last 2 seasons. And as you refer to, they are definitely some building blocks on the defense for the next defensive coordinator, whoever that may be, to come build around. Dexter Lawrence has become one of the best defensive players in the entire NFL, regardless of position. Just yesterday, his fellow players across the NFL voted him an All-Pro on the NFLPA Players All-Pro team. So that's clearly how the fellow players around the league feel about Dexter Lawrence. And Bobby Okereke came in and had a huge impact on the Giants defense. So there are building blocks for whoever comes in next to build around. But I do want to say, I think just almost as important as those player building blocks are a couple of coaching building blocks that are also currently still in the building. I don't know if Dexter Lawrence has as amazing of 2 season stretch that he's had without the development and guidance from Andre Patterson, who has become one of the best defensive line coaches, or at least should be respected as one of the best defensive line coaches in the entire NFL. And also Jerome Henderson in the secondary. These are 2 very well-respected position coaches around the NFL. And you have seen that what they have been able to do with some of the young players on the Giants team that have taken huge steps over the last couple of seasons under their guidance.
I think that's an important element to note, because you look at what Xavier McKinney did the last few seasons. You also look at Deonte Banks, the rookie. So he's going to at least have his same positional coach. And Andre Patterson did a heck of a job in Minnesota developing all those defensive linemen, including Danielle Hunter, who was in that Pro Bowl All-Pro conversation, just like what we saw with respect to Dexter Lawrence. So, Howard, that's encouraging, because these individuals will be working under the new defensive coordinator. But I want to bring up something that you hit on. Every 2 years, it has been a theme. Now, part of that in the past was the Giants had to hire a new head coach, Pat Shurmur, James Betcher. Then you had Joe Judge and Patrick Graham. And then, of course, Brian Dable comes in. He brings in his own defensive coordinator. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a head coach should always pick who he wants to work under him. I think it's unhealthy to force a coach on a head man. But now the 2-year increments, Howard, continues. And you mentioned, hey, players know they've got to continuously evolve. They have to adapt to change. But I think Brian Dable, year 3, was also hoping or operating under the expectation that they can at least maintain that continuity aspect.
Well, yeah, you want that to happen, but again, personalities are different. You don't know what's going on, and you have no thought. I guess there were some leaks and stuff coming from the locker room, so that would mean one of the coaches was explaining what he thought was happening on his end. So that's what you're getting out, the rumor mill, so to speak. But at the end of the day, it's just personalities. So I think that, Dable is a class, type A personality. I think Wink's a type A personality. I think that was part of what's going on. We highlighted all year long how the offense struggled. I mean, it really, really struggled. And the defense kind of came up. You were saying, oh, the defense is making turnovers. They're doing all these different things. And what is the offense doing with it? I think that sometimes when you're in the locker room, you have to really shield your players from, hey, we're in this together no matter what. It's not one side wins a game and one side loses a game. You have to really keep guys focused. And I'm not saying that's what's happening, but I've been on teams where that was part of the conversation where, hey, man, you guys got to pick it up over there, help us out a little bit or do something. And you would say it out loud and guys would be looking at you, giving you the side eye. But you really want to keep guys together, keep guys focused, keep guys grinding. And if that's, part of the personality traits of coaches, hey, we're doing our job kind of conversation, that's not, togetherness. We're in it together is always the answer.
Oh, you don't want basically 3 different facets. I'll throw in special teams and a team operating on an individual island. And at least if you connect some of the dots, Howard, some of that was going on. And Russ, I want to bring in another example that I think ties into what Howard was saying. And this may be a reason why the coaches didn't necessarily see eye to eye in terms of also the approach with handling the media. And you were hitting on how the reports came out, Russ. But if you remember, there was a point of the season where Xavier McKinney was frustrated with the communication between the players and the coaches. And when Wink Martindale met with the media a few days later, he voiced his displeasure and disappointment in McKinney explaining that. Whereas, Brian Daboll has a much different approach. Brian is all about keeping things behind closed doors, handling his business, keeping all the skeletons in the closet, for the lack of a better phrase. Whereas Wink doesn't mind maybe discussing that in the eyes of the media. And, you could maybe now look back and wonder, was that a sign of how you had two coaches on the staff who operated very differently?
I couldn't agree with you more. But here's the thing. And while the media, all of us lapped up everything that Wink would say because he was charming. He was great. And, he's got that grizzled personality and you liked it, from a defensive coordinator. But if the head coach wants it handled a different way, then the head coach has to get what he wants. Otherwise, it doesn't work. That becomes a problem. Howard's old coach, Bill Parcells, used to say to us all the time, this is back in the day, Howard, if you remember, Parcells, he had 7 assistants. Now it is more like 27 assistants on a team, but 7 assistants. And Bill would say, there's nothing off the record. There's nothing that gets kept quiet. You know why? He goes, I got 7 assistants, and my 7 assistants have 7 wives, and the 7 wives have 7 best friends. That's 21 people. Nothing stays quiet. You have to be in control of that. Bill, as Howard would attest, was in control of that. And you know what? To Brian's credit, that if Brian wants it handled that way, and Brian is the head coach of the New York Football Giants, then that's the way it has to be handled.
And we've also heard from many assistants over the course of NFL history, not just pertaining to the Giants, is assistants view themselves as you're supposed to carry out the vision of the head coach. And if that's not happening, then you can understand the head coach wanting to go in a different direction. Now, that wasn't the only change that is occurring with respect to the coaching staff, because we're going to have now an offseason where all 3 facets have been impacted. We mentioned Wink Martindale. Well, the Giants parted ways with Thomas McGahee, longtime special teams coordinator, as well as offensive line coach Bobby Johnson, and Jeff Nixon, the running backs coach, is moving on for different reasons. He became the Syracuse offensive coordinator. So, Matt, I want to bring you in to start turning our attention to some of these other moves. And let's start with McGahee, because here's an individual, and this just speaks volumes of what he was able to do for this Giants organization, considering the turnover rate for coaches. He was here for 10 seasons in 2 stints. He worked under 4 different head coaches, each of the last 3. And I think, unfortunately for McGahee, this past season, he was a product of so many injuries elsewhere on the roster. What happens? That winds up impacting special teams, where there's so much movement to begin with that he had to go through 5 different kickers, 4 of which actually kicked in a game, and multiple gunners and multiple return men. And when you have to do that consistently, as Thomas McGahee loves to say, you use the ingredients at your disposal to make the gumbo. Well, on a week-to-week basis, he was changing those ingredients, Matt. And it's not an excuse, but I think it's understandable why it wasn't as steady and consistent as many members of the coaching staff were hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, any NFL coach would tell you, you play the hand that you're dealt. And T-Mac would be the first one to say that. And injuries, they happen. It is unfortunate that you brought up the kicker situation. I can't remember the last time a team had 4 or 5 different kickers for a season. Like, that's just unbelievable. And especially with considering how consistent and how amazing of a season Graham Gano had last year, going into this season, that was probably the last position that anyone on the team had any sort of concerns about. But injuries happen. And, it's unfortunate to see T-Mac go, because he is a very well-respected coach, both around the league, inside this building. But, I mean, as you referred to, the special teams unit it really just did not get it done this season. It didn't live up to what Brian Daboll was clearly expecting it to. There were several occasions throughout the season, little mistakes here and there. I mean, honestly, go back to week 1, the field goal block against the Cowboys changed that game. I mean, it was towards the beginning of the game, of course, and who knows what might have happened anyway. But if that field goal doesn't get blocked in the first quarter, Andrew Thomas, doesn't get injured trying to tackle the the defender who's returning it. Who knows how the whole entire season could have gone? So, you can't use injuries as an excuse. We all know that. He was dealt a tough hand, but at the end of the day, as you said, as T-Mac always says, you're given the ingredients and you got to make the best gumbo that you can. And unfortunately, the Giants special teams unit this past season, the gumbo that was made just wasn't very good.
I think that's a very fair parallel because, once again, there's only so much seasoning you could put in to maybe bury some of the ingredients that you had to work with that you weren't necessarily hoping. And Howard, it goes also back to what you were talking about earlier, where you were saying, how many times did we talk about this season? The defense gets takeaways, but the offense doesn't capitalize off of that, and it may create some division. Well, as Matt was hitting on, how many times perhaps did they need the special teams unit to play the game of field positioning? And maybe something didn't happen, and as a result, you put the defense in a tough spot, or you put the offense in a tough spot, and that adds up. It's cumulative, as I like to say, over the course of a season. You can't just expect the offense and the defense to do the heavy lifting. You need special teams more often than not to deliver, whether it's field positioning or maybe delivering with a field goal, which we also saw sometimes decided games, considering how a lot of these affairs were relatively close this year.
I think you go back to the first game where there was a field goal block. I think that really affected the season from the standpoint of hurting Andrew Thomas, and he was out for a few weeks and couldn't be at his top performance for a while. That really made a big difference in the game. And right after that, there were several attempts to block field goals from other teams because they saw that you could do that against us. That was a little bit of a flaw. You saw on the punt team, guys getting very close to blocking punts, and that causes the punter to kick it sideways off the side of his foot sometimes, and guys are just not really completing and doing their jobs. Now T-Mac was doing his job. He's telling the guys what to do. He's helping guys. Not everybody out there is unhealthy. Not everybody out there is hurt. Or, everybody is playing at the best of their abilities. I get it, but you got to do your job no matter what and what position you play. And when it's time to do special teams is like I tell people it's a barometer of the depth of the team. Everybody on the special teams has to do their job. You have to make the plays. And he did. At the end of the year, they did make a couple of different, game difference plays with the return for a touchdown, first one in a long time. But there were so many other plays. The missed field goals, can't say that much about. You got your guys you paid a lot of money to, has a knee problem, he's out. You bring in another guy, he pulls a hamstring, he's out. You bring in another guy. So it's not a lot you can say about that part. That's just part of the game. Sometimes these guys, they get hurt. But the guys that are around them, not the guys that are kicking the balls, the snaps, the holes, everything else, just wasn't really working. And in the return game, it struggled until you brought somebody in. And I'm pretty sure that he's not making decisions on which receiver to keep or which DB to keep or which running back to keep. He's like, if he could make a decision on who he kept as a returner, he would have kept the returner right off the bat, and maybe the return game would have looked differently for the entire season. So, he is like the victim of circumstances of who's on the team, the production he was getting out of the guys and how they played, but he's a victim of circumstance because he can't do a lot other than what's given to him.
Well, I think what you're hitting on is a guy like Jamison Crowder, who was with the team earlier this offseason. And Joe Shane even addressed this at the bye week. They went with the younger guy in Eric Gray, and part of that is finances as much as it is X's and O's. So yeah. Thomas McGahee is limited. But in fairness, as you hit on, Gunnar Olszewski was a really nice late addition and did a nice job embracing that role after having a rough start with the Steelers. And then, of course, giving them that return for a score late in the season against the Rams. But Russ, it wasn't just special teams that had to navigate a lot of issues. It was also the offensive line because Bobby Johnson and the 10 different offensive line alignments this season.
Listen, and Howard will tell you, nobody likes to see coaches lose jobs. But a guy like Bobby Johnson, sometimes you have to make hard decisions. Bobby Johnson wasn't just a coach with the Giants. He was a very dear, close friend of Brian Daboll. You think that was an easy decision for Daboll to make? But for whatever reason, whether it was injuries or whatever it was, the offensive line has had problems, quite frankly, before Daboll got here, and it continues to have problems, and it's got to be straightened out. So sometimes those hard decisions have to be made. As we said at the top of the show, change becomes inevitable. Does it mean Bobby Johnson's a bad coach? No. Does it mean T-Mac was a bad coach? No. Change has to take place if the guys under your command are not getting the job done. And as you say, for whatever reason, injuries or not, those units weren't getting the job done to a satisfactory level for the organization.
And sometimes a new voice can take the team in a different direction. And it's the old story. In the National Football League, you have 53 players on a roster. It's easier from a turnover standpoint to make a change at the positional coach or the coordinator as opposed to completely revamping the roster, especially based on salary cap restrictions and so forth. So I think that's another thing that has to be taken into consideration. And that's why the Giants are going to have a lot of new faces. Go ahead, Howard.
I think so, yes. But at the same time, you got to remember, like, some of these guys come in together, they've traveled together, like Bobby Johnson and Coach Dable. They're like really close friends. So him letting his close friend go, that had to be a big one for him.
Without a doubt. And that's why Russ mentioned that 100%, because they go back to their days together in Buffalo. Bobby Johnson and Brian Dable worked alongside one another from 2019 to 21, and then they both came together to East Rutherford, New Jersey. So there was a reason why he brought him along, because they developed a good rapport and a good relationship. Dable was the OC. Bobby Johnson was the offensive line coach in Buffalo. We saw the development of Josh Allen, an improved offensive line since Allen's rookie year in 2018. All of that doesn't get overlooked, but you're dealing with new personnel, new dynamics, and the results are not necessarily always the same. So that's why Brian Dable decided to go in a different direction. And as far as what this means, Matt, with respect to the roster, we talked about what it means for the defense, and they still have Andre Patterson and Jerome Henderson on staff, but the offensive line, you've got some young guys that were hurt last season, and you have some veterans that they may move on from. And you hope that clearly Evan Neal returns to health, a critical year for him, still working on his rookie contract. So as much as we want to say you bring in a new offensive line coach, maybe that could do wonders, a lot is also going to depend on the well-being and durability of this young core that they're hoping to build around.
Oh, definitely. And, we spent a lot of time talking about, the defensive coordinator position. And I just want to say, I think whoever is filled to take over as offensive line coach is almost as important of a hire for Brian Dable as the defensive coordinator position. I mean, as several of you guys have noted, the offensive line has struggled the last however many seasons. This has been something that the offense has been trying to deal with for a while now, and bringing in whoever it is they decide to bring in to help stabilize this unit is going to be so crucial for the future of this Giants team. I mean, this past season, the offensive line, or the Giants, it's not all on the offensive line, but the Giants surrendered 20 more sacks than any other team in the league this year. 20 other sacks between them and the number 2 team with most sacks allowed, which is an insane stat when you think about it. So stabilizing that unit, and Andrew Thomas obviously had an all-pro season last year. He is their franchise left tackle. They just spent a second-round pick last year on John Michael Schmitz. And as Joe Shane mentioned in his end-of-season press conference Monday, they feel good about where his development and where he could get to, both on the field and as a leader in the locker room, which is something that is definitely important. And, whoever is brought in to be this next offensive line coach, it's going to be someone that they think is going to be able to help Evan Neal, because that could be one of the biggest deciding factors on how good this unit could be next season. If they can bring someone in who could help get him going, help bring out some of the attributes that made him the 7th overall pick. And at time going into the 2022 draft, people thought he could be the number 1 pick in the entire draft. So bringing someone in that can get Evan Neal back to what he was doing and dominating at Alabama is going to be so crucial for this offense and for the success of the entire Giants team going into 2024.
Matt, you're 100% right. But whoever comes in, the one thing he's got to get from Evan Neal, if he can get anything out of Evan Neal, he's got to get a healthy Evan Neal. And that's been a crippling factor. to Evan Neal's progress, certainly this season. We know he's had his problems, but the injuries, if you're playing on bum ankles all the time, no one's going to get the maximum out of Evan Neal. So that's paramount. I agree with you, Matt. Maybe whoever comes in can get Evan Neal going, but you can't get Evan going if he can't be healthy. And now he's on the mend.
You're 100% true. And I don't want to compare Evan Neal to Andrew Thomas, but I do just want to, remind everyone that Andrew Thomas dealt with injuries throughout his first 2 seasons in the NFL too. And it wasn't until year 3 where he really took that next step and looked like the Andrew Thomas that we know now. So you're 100% right that Evan Neal has got to be healthy going into next year. But if he is, and they bring in this new coach that can help bring out the best of him, we could see a totally different Evan Neal in 2024 than we've seen the last 2 seasons.
I concur with that. Yeah.
And don't forget, guys, also, as a team looked like it sometimes they were getting overpowered. They even changed strength coaches, I believe, right?
Well, Craig Fitzgerald moved on to Florida, so they're going to have to bring in a new strength and conditioning coach as well. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and all of these factors come into play. But just to spell out what you guys were talking about, Evan Neal has missed 14 games over his first 2 seasons. So he's barely played 1 full season in the National Football League, when you think about it, even though he has been in a Giants uniform for 2 years. So the sample size is still small. But I think what we all can at least agree on, based on what each of you contributed to this conversation, is the new offensive line coach is going to be responsible for still developing talent. This is not an old offensive line. Evan Neal, young. John Michael Schmitz, as Matt brought up, young, just got past his rookie year, and he's another guy that didn't play an entire rookie year because he was hurt. What happens with Howard, Josh Azudu, and Marcus McKeithen, who also are not long in the tooth? Can they stay healthy on the field? There's a lot of young talent, and I think if this line takes a step forward, can you keep the guys on the field durability-wise, as we've all been emphasizing? But number 2, if they can stay on the field, do you fine-tune the skill set, Howard, that they're consistent and reliable enough to perform at a good enough level to handle themselves and set the tone in the trenches?
Well, what they're going to have to do is, once you get everybody healthy, you get a healthy 5 guys, they're going to have to do the one thing that's been plaguing the team for the last 5 years. They got to find some way somehow to teach these guys how to handle the twist and the stunts. If they can figure out how to get these guys proficient in handling and passing off twists and stunts and getting their eyes up so that they're not just locked on one guy or following one guy to a spot, then their line play will increase dramatically. That's been the one thing that every line coach that's come in has been having a problem teaching this group of guys, or whichever group of guys it's been, how to pick those up. And that's the thing that's been plaguing them. The first game of the season, Dallas started off running twists and stunts, and then every team after that ran them for a while. Then once they stopped running them, all of a sudden the offensive line looks great. But that's the thing that you got to figure out, how to pick these guys up, especially the quicker guys that are explosive off the ball. You got to be prepared for that and find a way to be able to handle that. That's even before anyone blitzes, before an extra guy comes or anything. You got to be able to pick up those 4 guys in front of you with the twists and stunts, and you got to be proficient in it.
And that's a big reason why, as Matt hit on earlier, 3 Giants quarterbacks were sacked a total of 85 times, which is the second most in NFL history, a number that you have to avoid, whether you want to put it on the QBs or you want to put it on the offensive line. It's fair to say both factors contributed, which brings us to the quarterback position here before we wrap up, because aside from the coaching change, a big topic of discussion at the Monday presser was where they're going to go, not for the starter necessarily, but the quarterback depth chart. So we know Daniel Jones recovering from the torn ACL, his timeline for return up in the air. And Joe Schoen emphasized they have to prepare for the worst case scenario that he may not be available for week 1. We know that means Tommy DeVito is the only quarterback right now currently under contract who is healthy. Tyrod Taylor, a pending free agent. And they have Russ, the 6th overall pick. Now, Joe Schoen made it clear Daniel Jones is their guy. And when healthy, he will be the starting quarterback. But like any team, and especially this year, 11 of the 16 AFC teams had to go to a backup quarterback. So even if you hope and pray that your quarterback's going to stay healthy, the NFL gods then look at you, they laugh at you, and they have a good chuckle at your expense. So you have to prepare accordingly. And I think the Giants need to prioritize, do you bring back Tyrod Taylor That is not off the table, as Joe Shane indicated. Do you go younger in the draft? Do you have to take that into consideration for the salary cap? Or do you feel good enough about Tommy DeVito that he's the insurance policy? So a lot of things, Russ, that the Giants front office has to weigh here.
Yeah, and the dollars and cents, in particular, when you're talking about Tyrod Taylor, certainly that becomes a factor. I mean, Tyrod Taylor, like, quite frankly, is your perfect backup quarterback. He's a veteran guy. He's smart, but who knows what it's going to cost? I know in the past it was costing him what? I think he was making $5.5 million, $5.5 million, a season. Quite frankly, I wouldn't mind if Tyrod comes back. But if Tyrod is not coming back, then what veteran free agent, what quarterback can we bring in? Or as you say, in the draft, who are we going to bring in? And I firmly believe Daniel Jones is their guy. I don't think there's if or any buts about it. However, as you say, you got to prepare for the worst, and they have to be ready. So if you're going to draft a quarterback, then Tyrod, when I say draft a quarterback, I'd be knocked over with a feather if they drafted a quarterback with their first pick. I don't see that happening at all because Daniel Jones is their guy. But if you're going to bring in a quarterback, you have to have confidence that that guy could be the backup, because they're certainly not going to draft a quarterback and then have Tyrod Taylor come back.
I'm taking notes. When we get around the draft, we will run an experiment with Russ. We'll tar and feather him in center square to determine whether or not he does fall over or he stays upright in the event that the Giants do draft a quarterback. So wherever you are, just make sure that you took note of this.
Draft a quarterback with their first pick is what
Correct. Yes, with the 6th overall pick. No, I heard you loud and clear, and we're going to make sure that it's documented crystal clear here on the Giants Hangout. We take notes. We're studious in everything that we do here moving forward. So I'm glad that you at least put it in perspective from that standpoint. In fairness, though, Matt, and I want to bring you into the dialogue too, I think Russ brings up a number of interesting points. Now, even if they decide to go younger to help some of the salary cap constraints, and we've seen a lot of teams do that because, as Russ hit on, it's the going rate of about $5 million a year for a veteran backup, and every team does not have that luxury. But you have to ask yourself, if you do draft a quarterback, is that quarterback ready, especially if Daniel Jones is not ready to go week 1, to come in and help you win football games? Because I thought one of the interesting things that Joe Shane mentioned is they need somebody ready to go that can run the offense, compete, and help them win football games. If you're bringing in a developmental project and Daniel's not ready to go, that doesn't put you in any better position than you were perhaps this season in handling Daniel's injury.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it on the head. I mean, if they draft a quarterback, whether it's day 1, day 2, day 3, it's a tall task to have that rookie be ready to go potentially to start week 1 of the NFL season in their first year in the league. Like, that is a big ask, even for we've seen it in recent years with guys that are taken, number 1 overall, top 3, top 5 overall. Those quarterbacks, you see, they tend to, whether or not they're ready for it, teams put them in to start right from the get-go. But I don't think that's necessarily, the best way, A, for the team to win football games, and B, for those quarterbacks to develop. I mean, I don't want to compare any quarterback situation to potentially the best quarterback in the league and Patrick Mahomes, but Patrick Mahomes sat an entire season, his rookie year, only played the very last game of his rookie season, and then he started as the starting quarterback for the Chiefs in year 2. Aaron Rodgers sat the first 3 years of his career before he finally got a chance to start football games. So I get that in an ideal world, you would like to bring, a rookie quarterback in on a rookie contract and have that guy be ready to go as your insurance plan to start for week 1 in case Daniel's not ready. But if the Giants, if any team wants to get their season going on the right note, that may not necessarily be, the ideal plan. As we saw this year, I don't know the exact number, 60-something quarterbacks started a game in the NFL this season. It was the second most in NFL history, with the first most being 2022, where there was 1 or 2 more quarterbacks that started a game. So the last 2 seasons, we have seen more starting quarterbacks start a game than ever before in NFL history. So which just highlights how crucial the backup quarterback position is. And frankly, I couldn't tell you right now which way the Giants are going to go with that position, whether it's bring Tyrod back, bring in a different veteran, bring in a rookie. Joe Schoen has made it clear that they are going to address the position in some capacity, but honestly, I think it's a little too early to say which route exactly they do go, but you can bet that they will be bringing someone in that they do feel confident will be able to start from week 1, just in case Daniel Jones is not fully recovered from that torn ACL.
Well, and Matt, to your point, Cleveland had 4 different quarterbacks start this season and still won double-digit games and made the playoffs. So if that doesn't spell out how crazy this season was, then I don't know what is. And Howard, I want to give you the last word, but one other thing that I want you to respond to that, Matt was hitting on is the timeline here. The good news is by the time the draft comes along, they'll have a better idea of where Daniel Jones is in the rehab process. So it's not as if they have to make a decision tomorrow, but free agency comes first. And when free agency starts, a little bit earlier in the year compared to the draft. So if you do like the free agent options or you want to bring back Tyrod Taylor, that you have to operate with before you may have a good grasp of where Daniel's going to be closer to the start of the season.
I think there are a lot of factors that you have to think about. First off, like Daniel's a running quarterback, so his legs are his his honey, most of all. So him coming back at 100% is one thing, but him coming back mentally 100%, being prepared to run, to cut, for people to be around his legs, that's usually, that takes a lot to get to. Someone's going to have to hit him to get him like, okay, I'm all right, I'm safe, I'm fine. Right. And that's the hardest thing to get by. That's number one. Number two, you have taken the factor, why is he hurt in the first place? Like, okay, well, he didn't have a lot of protection. You're talking about 80 sacks. The 80 sacks for the season. You're going to have to address that offensive line. I know that we're talking about the quarterback constantly and who can back up Daniel, who could stand in there for Daniel if Daniel's not ready. If there's no change in offensive line, if the play of the offensive line, if there's not another guy that comes in and gets a little bit better, then it doesn't matter who they bring in to play quarterback, because he's not going to make it. When you speak of these teams that have had multiple quarterbacks, they get hurt on sometimes a fluke play, but they have good offensive lines. They're able to move the ball down the field. They're able to run the ball. They're able to do a lot of different things. They're going to have to fix the tires before they start fixing the car, is what I keep telling guys. And I think the quarterback position could be filled in the first pick in the draft if the right guy fell in the spot. But chances are those first 3 guys will be gone off the board in those first 3 or 4 picks. So you'll be left with probably a wide receiver or something that's going to be the best player in the draft. You're not going to pass up one of the, a career-changing or defining wide receiver to reach for a lineman, and that's going to be the big issue going forward. I think as for backups, there are going to be a lot of guys out there that they could pick up. There'll be quarterbacks. The kid from Michigan will be a 2nd or 3rd round pick probably. The kid from Washington who was racing up the charts, racing down the charts, racing up the charts with those bad knees. But some true ability, could be a backup quarterback as well. He may not be a 1st round pick. He may not even be a 2nd round pick, depending on how they evaluate his legs and stuff. So there are guys in the draft that you can probably pick up. There are a couple other guys too that'll be in the draft that are decent quarterbacks that could be backup quarterbacks. As far as veterans go, there's everything's on the table. You can find one of these guys that are backing up now that probably when their starters are going to come back, they'll be sent to the bench or even cut. So they'll be available. You can find guys like Justin Fields who won't be released but should be traded. They're not going to get a lot for him in a trade, whether they want to say that or not. They're not going to get like a 1st round pick for him. They're not even going to get a 3rd round pick for him, I don't believe. They might get a 4th round pick for him. So that there are going to be players out there that you can pick up in the draft that show potential. But the thing is, you want a good backup quarterback. You don't want a guy you're not, in theory, you don't want a guy in here that people and fans are going to say could challenge Daniel for his starting role, because that just adds like drama to the team and outside noise that you don't want to listen to all the time.
Well, you want somebody that can help you win football games.
Yes.
Yeah, they have had a lot of drama. I don't think they want more, but I think the bigger priority has to be, are you confident the quarterback can run your offense, keep you competitive, and win football games? So that's why, to use your car analogy, the tires have to be in good shape. So is the infrastructure. but even the backup driver matters at the end of the day to help navigate things, even if he's got to get out of the car and push it himself and try to keep the offense afloat. With that being said, yes, that is going to wrap up the last regular season edition of the Giants Hangout podcast. It is presented by Crestron, a proud partner of the New York Giants. We appreciate everybody tuning in all throughout the season as we usually recap every game and look forward a little bit different as we took a look to what should be an eventful offseason and the impact of some of the coaching changes. Lance Medow, Russ Salzberg, Howard Cross, Matt Citak of Giants.com with you. You can stay locked to all the latest with respect to the Giants on Giants.com, the mobile app, and your favorite podcast platform. Have a good one.